Hey friends, welcome back to the Reluctant Leader podcast. And I'm Paul Jenkins, your host, and I love spending time exploring how all of us can lead with more authenticity and, believe it or not, more joy. Yeah, I know we can all feel reluctant, and I know I have, but it doesn't mean that we can't also be resilient. So in today's episode, I want to talk about something that, I guess every one of us wrestles with this. The power of narratives. So by narratives, I mean the stories that we tell about people, the stories that we tell about ourselves, and how easy it is to live inside a story that might be true, kinda, but is incomplete. Now, to get started, let's talk about a story that comes from the world of professional football. If you're an NFL fan like me, you've probably heard of Bryce Young and Stroud. If you're not a fan of professional football, you haven't, but hang with me, it still matters. Both of these men were top NFL draft picks in 2023. Actually, they went pick 1 and pick 2. Both of them won the Heisman Trophy in college. Both of them were hyped as franchise-saving quarterbacks, but this is where it gets a little different and a little wild. One of these players gets a good narrative and the other gets a bad one. Bryce Young was the number 1 pick, and he landed with Carolina, but he had a rough roster. That's my team, so it's hard to talk about this, but they had a bad offensive line. They had no real weapons. They had a new coaching staff. Actually, the coach that he started with was fired 11 games into the season, just a little over halfway through the season. He spent his rookie year literally running for his life, and the Panthers lost a ton of games. And so the story that got formed around him was this: he's just too small and he is short. He can't read defenses and he's just not that guy. But fast forward to his second and third seasons and he's playing a ton better, making smart reads, leading his team to win, still making mistakes here and there, but that's to be expected of somebody who's new. But he can't seem to shake that narrative. Even though he's won 4 games in a row as of this recording, people still see him through the lens of that first impression. What about CJ Stroud? He was drafted second by the Houston Texans, and he is the opposite story. He walked into a much more stable situation, had an amazing rookie season, and the media crowned him the savior of the Houston Texans. But a year later, he had a terrible year by comparison. His production dipped, and even this season, it's not as good as it was. Now, no one said that he was overrated. As a matter of fact, they looked at his obstacles. Like, he had a bad offensive line last year. He got sacked a ton. His leading wide receivers were injured. His running game was non-existent. And they said, well, he'd be doing better if his team were healthy. Isn't that wild? The same exact circumstances, 1 year removed, but a different spin. Stroud got the benefit of the doubt. Bryce got buried by doubts, all because of that first narrative that people told. So let's talk about how we do the same thing. That's the thing about narratives. Once they're written, they're extremely hard to rewrite. We do this every single day. We meet somebody one time and we decide that we know who they are. We see one mistake and we assume that that's their character. We remember one bad chapter and think that must be the whole book. And maybe even worse, we tend to do this to ourselves. We lock into a version of our own story that doesn't leave room for redemption. It's easier, it seems, to live with a label than to fight for a new narrative. But friends, that is not how our God works. See, God's narrative is never done. If the Bible teaches us anything, it teaches us that God's a God who refuses to let someone's first impression define their final outcome. Think about it. Moses was a murderer and he was a fugitive, but he became the leader of God's people. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and yet his confession that Jesus is Lord becomes what the church is built on. Paul literally hunted down Christians, and he ended up writing half of the New Testament to Christians. Each of them started with a story that looked like failure, but God. but God kept writing. That's what Philippians 1:6 reminds us of. This is what Paul wrote, that man who was hunting down Christians. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion, because God doesn't just start stories, y'all, he finishes them. And if you're still breathing, I guarantee you, he is still writing. Let's talk about some practical takeaways about narratives. Here are a couple ways that this can hit home. Number one, don't write people off too soon. You know who I'm talking about. That person who frustrates you at work. Hey, teachers, you got a student who just never seems to get it. Maybe you have a family member that always seems to be stuck in the same bad patterns. You might just be looking at their rookie season. So give them room to grow. Hey, here's another takeaway. Don't believe the wrong story about yourself. You are not the sum of your worst moments. Actually, you're not even the sum of your best moments. You're the sum of what Jesus says about you. And his narrative always moves toward redemption. Maybe your first season was messy. Bryce Young can relate to that. Maybe you've been labeled, written off, or underestimated. But listen, if God can rewrite Moses, Peter, and Paul, then I know this. He can rewrite you as well. So here's the challenge. Before you hit send, before you make that judgment, before you tell your own story in shame, pause and ask, is this the full story? Or is this just a chapter? Because the truth is, the first season doesn't define the player, and the first failure doesn't define the person. The only person that can define us is the author, because he's the only one that gets to finish the story. Hey, thanks for listening to the Reluctant Leader podcast. And if this hits home, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their story isn't over. And if you're in a hard season, hang on. It's just the first chapter. God is still writing. If this has encouraged you, share this with somebody. Subscribe to this channel. And as always, remember this. When you give God your best, he will take care